Marc Sheldon, welcome to Solar Insiders.
Thank you for having me.
You come to us with a new offering for the home battery market, which is very exciting, at a very exciting time, I might add. And it's from RedEarth, which is based in Brisbane here in Australia, which is a lovely thing. But I thought we would start by you telling us what this new offer is all about.
Well, we've spent a fair bit of time, in fact, a better part of a year now when I look back at it, having had discussions with Ambibox about where the market's going to go and where we want to take it. And in essence, we've now announced a memorandum of understanding about joint development between Ambibox out of Germany, who provides the vehicle-to-grid charger that we are now bringing to market in the next 2 or 3 months, and Nebula Electronics out of Fuzhou in China, who is a company that provides a lot of network and battery testing equipment for pretty much all the industry. And that is for a fully integrated offer. And what is that? It's a system that comprises the EV charger, the solar inverter, and the battery inverter all in one. And the massive difference, while some might say we've seen some of that before, the massive difference really is that it's an fully integrated hardware product with every single component of it software enabled. So you can start by using it maybe as just a solar inverter. And then later on, if you decide that you want to get your EV, you call us up, or better, call your installer, which is the preferred option. And you want to install an EV, and well, they'll send you a cable. You actually don't need the electrician, and they'll send you a software license. Well, you have to pay for it, but at the end of the day, that's all it is. So you don't need an electrician on site. You can plug it in directly into the system, and then if you can wield a screwdriver, you'll put the holder for the actual CCS2 connector on the wall, and you're done.
Yeah, it sounds pretty good, and it's being dubbed Microgrid in a box, MIB, which we've made a few jokes about Men in Black. More on that later. But it's a really, really interesting offering, and you know, we published a story earlier in the week on One Step Off the Grid about the MIB, and it's had some really big interest. And I think I was thinking to myself after speaking to you last time for the article, is this a bit like with our, I mean, I'm probably really oversimplifying it, but is this a bit like with our home entertainment systems where we used to have, you had the telly, and then you had the video recorder, and then when technology moved a bit further, you had your DVD for some of the things, but you still had the video for all your favorite videos, and you have the stereo. And these days, you've got a TV, and maybe you've got a couple of speakers for your stereo, but that's about it. Like, we're not buying all these other things. Is this where the home energy management market is headed? Are we going to start seeing offerings like this, where it's just really, you get the one sort of really smart box and then add software and maybe a cable or two?
I think it's part of it. It's not to oversimplify, because I think it's significantly easier to actually do what you just outlined in the home entertainment side of things than to actually do all of this in the energy side of things. We can only tackle so many of these options, but the idea behind it is collapsing all the major generation devices in a house, or storage devices in a house, and your major load devices. And there will be more to announce on that in the next probably 6 to 12 months, all into one basically DC backbone. So I think the major differentiator is today you would basically have separate boxes that would all be connected using your AC connection. And then you would have to get these boxes to talk to each other. You would have to coordinate how they actually work. By collapsing them into the DC backbone, at the end of the day, there's two things we get out of it. We get significant efficiency improvements. So we can charge with excess solar while potentially charging our car, while using your AC connection to actually power your house, all at the same time. And you can use all the excess solar you have on that front as well, even above and beyond the AC capacity of your inverter. But also you get to control all the devices on one bus. And you have a common way of managing them, which is significantly simpler than trying to connect them through your AC grid. How far that will go is an interesting question. I do still think there's a need for a HEMS that goes beyond that, that actually connects to the rest of your house and manages, for example, loads like your washing machine.
Right. That's a home energy management system for
Correct.
those of us who are not.
Sorry.
Yep. No,
But
that's okay.
that is, that is a significantly more complex undertaking. Integration
Yep.
of these assets is a nightmare. There's so much to do there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on that note, I mean, one of the reasons why this offering is so interesting is because it is coming at the convergence of all these technologies. And in particular, we're moving to the stage now where it really is looking like it's maybe not even worth it for people to get solar without a home battery. And then we're also at the point where a lot of people are, if not buying electric vehicles, seriously considering it and locking it in for their next big purchase. So this is also a way of, I guess, not having to buy all that stuff all at once and thinking ahead, and thinking of how you're going to manage your home, especially as you electrify it more. How important is that to sort of keep into account now while we've got this sort of battery rebate dangling, and people are getting excited? What's your advice for, aside from obviously to buy the MIP?
As many as you want, in fact, but yes.
What's your advice as far as, how do we need to approach this, and what are the things that we've got to be really careful not to miss and to ignore?
Well, it's really hard to give advice to people about this because a lot of these decisions are driven not necessarily only through their technical requirements, but also simply through budget. And I think
Yeah.
that's the critical piece for me. In the past, you had to make decisions. The budget for solar systems and usually runs between $8,000 and $10,000, and it's been doing that for the last 20 odd years. Customers don't really change it that much. It just happens so as the module prices decrease that they buy bigger solar systems. And it's about similar for batteries. There's always roughly the same type of budget in the same type of
Yeah.
socioeconomic setup. What
We're still looking at about $1,000 per kilowatt hour. Is that roughly right
I think
now?
that's changing. I think that price will be
Yeah.
dropping, especially with the STCs coming in with the cheaper home batteries program. Absolutely, it will drop. I also think volume and scale that is driven through that will make the overall price decrease in general, and obviously increasing competition as more vendors enter the market here. But I think the critical piece here is it's an entry-level product that allows you to scale up without the need for significant additional installation resources. When you look at your cost for installation, quite often, for an overall system, quite often about 30 to 50% of your cost, depending on the complexity, can be simply labor. And if you then look at it and say, great, I'm going to install solar first because that might be the initial thing that I can afford or want to do. And then you need to install a battery next. Now you need to get the installer out again. Every time the installer shows up, you pay. And if you start combining all these pieces, you do maybe solar, then the battery, then your EV. Every time the installer comes out, now your actual component of labor in your overall system cost possibly exceeds 60 or 70% because it's 3 different installs. Complexity increases as well. By doing this, by having it all integrated, you enable that, okay, I'm just going to spend my $8,000 to $10,000, get a solar system, it'll have this platform. Now, it doesn't matter what you do first. You do battery or you do an EV, or you might just do only one of them. There is very little additional cost. Your install for a battery, which we do suggest get an installer out, don't do it yourself. You do need to have a license for that.
Lots of very strict rules.
Correct. And for a right reason too. But for that, it'll be very simple. The installer will probably not spend more than half an hour on site.
Right.
So in contrast to before where they would need to cable stuff up, it's a very simple install. And as I said before, for an EV install, it's a plug and play on your own.
And if you're looking at a box which can accommodate, which can do battery storage, has the inverter, hybrid inverter, and can do charging and vehicle to home and vehicle to grid, we should mention as well. I'm sure you did already. Are people going to have their electricity systems upgraded at their homes? Is there going to be work that needs to be done? If we've just got to say a normal single phase house, is that going to be a problem, or is that really no big deal?
No, the system will work. Well, as usual in any of these installations, if you have a 20 or 25-year-old main switchboard, there is a very high likelihood that there are some
Yeah.
regulatory requirements to get that upgraded. But short of that, there is no need to fundamentally change your infrastructure at home.
Because I know that a friend of mine, and I'm going to butcher this story, I'm can already tell, but she has had the solar system installed and then had an EV charger recently installed with her new EV. And I can't even remember which brand, so that takes that out of the equation. But because her house was actually 3-phase, there were some complications on making sure that the charger wasn't going to affect the other phases of the house or something or other. Does that sound
Possibly.
I'm talking gobbledygook now.
It depends, right? So if the charger, again, what I would suspect the charger would have to be a 3-phase charger, and it might be around phase balancing and phase imbalances. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think they were concerned that, they didn't want it to sort of kick in charging if a few other big sort of big ticket items were on the same phase or something. I'm not sure.
That might be the case. Yeah. So they might just be overloading individual phases because they already have something up to the upper limits of whatever your breaker was.
They have a pool
and a pool pump, and that might be a single phase pool pump.
Yeah,
there are options there.
Okay, but for most people, if you're starting from scratch and you don't have sort of that really old system, it shouldn't be too complicated.
It shouldn't. And at the end of the day, one of the things that we're working on, and I can't go into too much detail on this one, is really how do you actually set up a 3-phase system? Phase imbalances are a big issue when systems like this are installed right now, because most of the inverters can only handle so much phase imbalance. And that is a problem because an installer, while they might be able to then balance the phases as they install it, they obviously don't control what happens after they leave the house. So if somebody comes along and goes, hey, I'm just going to throw another air conditioner in here or in here, not all electricians are really careful with this. You might just get to the position where your phase imbalances are so high that your inverter will no longer function.
Yeah.
The system will be able to cater to this, and I have to stop talking about this in more detail because that stuff.
Are we getting into the HEMS territory now?
Not necessarily. No, this is power electronics issues more than anything else.
Okay, right. Because I just thought then she also has a induction cooktop, so so that could be managing all of that stuff. But this part is really interesting, and I think as people electrify their homes and more things are electric, we will have to pay a bit more attention to that. But
it's an interesting point. Sorry to interrupt you on this one, but this is a really interesting point to talk about, because you mentioned before this convergence on the home entertainment front and how easy it was, and how you now have basically one system that does everything. The complexity of the energy system, and especially our homes, and our expectation that it just works. We just plug things in and they just work. And that there is no, we don't need to worry about putting this on a different phase. I can't run this at the same. No, that's all gone by the wayside with the grid as we have it right now. And we just push that out and the grid will take care of it. As we move the complexity into the homes with these types of systems, and as we go to, I expect, fully a 0-0 grid connection, we have to make it real easy for the end customer to not have to worry about this. We basically have to take that complexity out of the system, but now just for the home.
Because you're right. The expectation is really high, isn't it? It's like people don't want to have to, it used to annoy me having to plug the different colored little cords out of the DVD player into the video, and now I don't have to do that. I'm wrapped, but this is another level, so it will be really important. I'm just going to latch on to something you just said, this 0-0 grid. I want to talk about that because, and this is another thing we talked about for the previous article. There's also a big push federally and particularly in WA, where the battery rebate is it's mandatory for you to join a VPP. There's a big push for households with batteries, cars, electric cars, etc., to join virtual power plants. And I guess this is going to be a really important issue going forward because, first of all, we haven't had great success with them so far. I mean, we have in that they've been shown to work. They've been proven and they can offer amazing grid services, and we all know the potential there. That's not up for argument. But the consumer uptake side of it is, and it hasn't been a runaway success in that department. People are still very wary of having the big the man come in with their hand and take control of the assets that they've paid for with their own money and ostensibly with the intention of taking some of their power, so to speak, back. And there's a big question about whether it is the best thing for the consumer. And I thought this is a really interesting thing to discuss. And this idea of the 0-0 connection between the home and the grid, it's something I'd love to explain a bit more to our listeners. And I'll finish in a second, but just also your pedigree in the energy industry is pretty interesting in that respect too, because you've got some very interesting experience at that grid edge. So over to you,
I
Marc.
think you wrapped 3 questions into one there.
I did 3 massive questions into one. So feel free to just
Let me start with the first one. I mean, my background in this space dates back to renewables now since 2009, so it's a fairly long time. But specifically on the electricity side, I was chief operating officer at Sonnen and then chief operating officer at Switched In. And in both cases, obviously, VPPs play a massive role for both companies. They're at the heart, if you like, for what they do. And it's been a very interesting experience. And you mentioned just now that it's really difficult for a lot of customers to accept the fact that there is someone who controls this rather expensive asset that they just spent so much money on. And they make, small amount of money out of it. And they then read in news articles that somebody else, the aggregator and VPP operator in this case, made a significant amount of money because something happened. I don't know, Catlight Power Station exploded or the grid disconnected in South Australia. And all of a sudden they find, these guys made $1,600 and I get 200. It's a bit of a disconnect between the asset owner and the people that benefit from it. I think that's not going to change. I think that particular thinking, do I hand over control of something that I really paid for, is not going to change much.
No.
The critical piece for me is also that the benefit that we or the VPP operator used to get out of it, specifically focused on FCAS as a significant revenue source, has also fallen by the wayside. And we now see that market has, I wouldn't say collapsed, but significantly decreased in overall size, not least because there's so many big batteries who are now coming in and just basically taking it and reducing the volatility in the FCAS market and the contingency market. So that's one piece of it. And the other piece is there's other options. Amber Smart Shift is an option where you can leverage wholesale market exposed tariffs and then play in the market if you've got appropriately sized systems and make significantly more money. There's other wholesale market exposed retailers, local volts, Flow Power are some that come to mind. And we provide, again, not to toot our horn, but we provide an option which we call the private power plant, which is not an aggregated service, but in essence, it's behind the meter optimizer that takes into consideration wholesale market tariffs to execute a basic and optimization strategy on your local battery and storage resources. It's not unique. I mean, you can buy if you're halfway good at coding or actually putting stuff together, you can do it with a Home Assistant. And there's a lot of these homebrew systems out there now that are actually fairly smart and in some cases better than what SmartShift can pull together. And they interact with, again, Amber and local volts or anyone else out there. So there is now a significantly nascent and growing market of these opportunities. And it does really well. Now, in the context of what this means for the grid, everybody says you need this to provide services to the grid. So you need an aggregator. I'm not disagreeing in some cases here, but on a general basis, there is a good overlap between tariff signals in the wholesale market and the need for the grid in context of what you want with a battery behind the meter. So if your prices in the grid are high, more than likely what will happen is at that point in time, you've got a problem where you've got an undersupply of generation. You've got significantly too much demand. At that point in time, your battery would probably export to the grid, which is
Yeah.
exactly what you want in that situation. If your price is low, again, you might have an oversupply of generation. At that point in time, your battery will likely import. And
Mm.
this is doubly true if you're actually charging an EV, because at that point in
Yeah.
time, you have more power that you'll need to move between those two locations. So just using those tariff signals already gives you a significant grid benefit. Now you add in, and we mentioned this in our last conversation, we talked about this, you add in the very early stages of localized distribution flexibility marketplace, as evidenced by Piclo and United Energy in Victoria. And if we can make that available to residential and smaller scale C&I customers, at that point in time, you have an additional revenue stream, and that would be, you could add on top of that, and then you would really have some great impact, and
Yeah.
you wouldn't even need an aggregated option. Well,
Yeah.
possibly for the flexibility marketplaces, because there it's a bit hard for the DNSP to deal with a large number of
Yes.
smaller players with 5 or 10 kilowatts.
Mm. And so if people didn't want to, be sort of in the weeds of it there and didn't want to really know about it, but they did want to have a smart system and, obviously not send solar to the grid when it's negative prices and not buy when it's a peak event. What kind of tariff signals do we need to move to? Because there's been a bit of controversy about that as well. This sort of idea of time of use is great, and but it can sting people terribly if they're not on top of it. They sort of switch to that because they see that, oh, look, I can get this if I do this, but they don't realize that if somebody happens to, I guess, turn on the oven in the middle of a peak event, that's not great. And then if you add that to the demand tariffs, which are really nasty and hopefully not going to become too popular, where that sort of one little mistake in your usage can then set you up for the whole month of high costs. It just seems to me that there's a lot of things that consumers can trip up on. What's your feeling about how we need to set up the grid now and regulate these tariffs to make it as straightforward as possible? Like, this is a high, demand event. This is a low demand event. How do you do that for consumers who don't want to sort of get into the nitty gritty?
Oof.
All the easy questions for you today.
I wish I could answer that one and have like an easy solution to it. Unfortunately, there doesn't exist one. And the problem here is this works. And let's break it out. In essence, what you're doing is you're just moving from using your retailer as a financial hedge, because that's in essence what the retailer is. They sit between you and the wholesale market, and they make
Yeah.
money by hedging it appropriately. This could be financial, it could be technical. Whereas now what we're doing is, if we have those wholesale market exposed tariffs, and to a degree, the time of use tariffs are an approximation of that at some level, very crude, but still an approximation, is you're now pushing some of that risk onto the consumer. And that works really well. So what I've outlined before, using something like your private power plant behind the meter optimization to wholesale tariffs, works really, really well if you have a large solar system and if you have a large battery storage system. So you actually manage to have a system that is larger than whatever usage you might have in your house. So now you can actually participate in the grid actively, not only offsetting your self-consumption, but also participating in the grid. The issue is this only works for a relatively small part of our population,
Yeah.
because it's not cheap, and you need to be in your own house, and you need to
Mhm.
have appropriate roof space and no shading. And that doesn't apply to everyone. You can use batteries to play that as well. And again, you're still exposed to some level of risk, and it's still not cheap. So you're still not solving that problem. And if you're in an apartment, quite often that's impossible for you because
Yeah.
you won't be able to put a battery anywhere close to where you need it to be, and you won't have it behind your own meter. So all of these challenges are not easily solvable. Um, I don't have an easy solution to this from the tariff side. I
Yeah.
think the place we need to get to, and there's been this fantastic report in ABC today about some of the work that's happening at a Deakin University with energy locals. I don't know if you've been following that, and this is around peer-to-peer trading, and
Yep.
it's a local project which I quite like because I think there is some level of solution in that, but short of that, which is a massive regulatory change, you need to make that work. You need local use of system tariffs, Lewis tariffs. You're familiar with those, probably, I would expect. So the biggest issue that you have right now. Sorry, we're jumping around.
No, it's all right.
Let me finish my previous point. The challenge with tariffs is this will work for a small part of your community. It will not work for others. And even for the small part of the community, it still exposes them to the risk that you outlined, that there are situations where your battery might be flat. You might have run it flat because you had bad days of rain, and you might have an unforeseen event, which again could be some level of unforeseen shutdown of large generation devices, leaving you with high demand and low generation, meaning you might hit your $15,000 per megawatt hour price ceiling. Now you have to pay because you have to keep your house warm. You have to actually be able to cook. You have to have your lights on. And now it's expensive because your wholesale market exposed. Every kilowatt hour is $15. That's not a great move. That risk you can't take away. So you're replacing a financial hedge through your retailer with a technical hedge in your own house.
Yep.
And that's the problem that's not easily solved. Now, how could you approach this potentially? Peer-to-peer trading, because the people that have too much generation, in a lot of cases, would be able to potentially locally trade with someone else. To do that, though, you have the issue that every time you inject a kilowatt hour into the grid, you have to pay network tariffs. And these network tariffs make the assumption that your kilowatt hour travels throughout the whole network, uses the whole transmission and distribution infrastructure, and that's how it's set up.
Yeah.
A local use of system tariff, it's a bit of a challenge in how you manage that, but a local use of system tariff makes the assumption that your kilowatt hour travels from you, maybe to your neighbor. So you inject a kilowatt hour, old mate next door wants to use it. You don't pay your 11 cents per kilowatt hour network tariffs. You might just pay 2 because the only cable you actually use is your local cable. The only infrastructure you actually touch might be a local transformer. That's it. Tracing electrons is sadly not possible. You can't put a stamp on it and go like, we know where it went through. It doesn't work like that. But there are solutions to that as well. So there are, some of them, companies out of Perth have done some of that. So there's people who've done work around this, and there's global solutions that exist as well. But there are also really simple ones. Local Vaults has a peer-to-peer trading option. It exists today.
Right.
It doesn't solve the peer-to-peer trading problem under Lewis tariffs. So you still pay your network service tariffs, which means your floor is basically set by the network tariffs. But that's okay. You can still do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That would help, and it would actually solve that problem because you have, let's say, that 20-25% of the population that can actually afford building a system that's too big. And now all of a sudden they can make money by selling it to their neighbor who can't afford it, who has a shaded property. My neighbor, for example, can't afford it. He can, but his roof is south facing and he's got a big tree in the yard. So, you can put on as much as you like. He won't be able to get solar out of his house.
Yeah. I mean, can you put it anywhere else? Is there?
No, not so much. His property isn't big enough for it. But if I have currently 11 kilowatts on my roof. We don't use much, right? I've got a battery, obviously. So I basically use. I'm carbon neutral completely, but I've got enough for my neighbor. So
can you just chuck a plug over the fence for it?
Yeah, I think the law will step in the way of that. Unfortunately, because it crosses a boundary, you do have to go through the grid. But it would work for them if we had a local use of system. I would just go, whatever I have in excess, you can use, and he wouldn't have a problem with that at all.
And conceivably, is this where VPPs are useful? As far as
they don't solve that problem.
No.
They don't solve that problem. I
Yeah.
mean, at the end of the day, VPPs, look at who actually runs VPPs, right? You get a number of VPPs that are there for particular capabilities like FCAS, and I think the Tesla VPP is a classic example. And then you look at Origin and AGL, who run some of the largest VPPs in Australia. They use the VPPs as a counterparty to their generation assets. So they use it within their active trading. And you can see how that works, how their VPPs actually kick off at times where you wouldn't really expect it, but that fits in with their trading needs. So that makes sense for a gentailer. But is it good for the grid? I
Mm.
I don't know. I think it's good for them.
Yeah.
And the money they make is not money that they give you. So
No.
no, I'm not a fan of VPPs.
No. Okay, fair enough. Look, and you're not alone. I think there's a lot of that sort of feeling coming out now that is this just another way for these sort of incumbents to really keep their grip in the face of consumer energy, and that's a pretty cynical way of looking at it, I suppose. But there does need to be a lot more work, I think, from the industry side, a lot more education, a lot more regulation, and a lot more consideration of how we're going to make this work in a way where people don't feel like it's yet another sort of, oh, we'll just do what you tell us to do and pay those prices, and you can make those huge profits and we'll be fine. So I think people are expecting to see some really big changes come out of this consumer-driven transition, and, it has to be changes on the consumer side. And I think we're starting to accept that the broader scale transition to renewables is going to mean a very spiky, volatile grid for a little while. It's going to mean that we probably can't get power prices down to where we'd like to have them for a little while yet, because coal's on the way out, this and that, which is why everyone's investing in solar and batteries. So it's going to need to be a very good deal for the consumers.
I agree. It's unfortunate that any change comes with challenges as we progress through the change. And before we settle into a steady state on a fully distributed grid, there is going to be pain. The challenge for us, though, is that this distributed grid basically needs, I would say smart components and smart participants in the grid on all sides, not just the big
Yeah.
players, but even every consumer, every customer, every NMI that's connected needs to be smart. And that's the thing of when I talked about 0-0, that's really what it comes down to. Ultimately, I suspect, we will have things like dynamic operating envelopes, which are currently all on export, we'll have them on import as well. And you will have minimums or maximums imposed on both import as well as export. And the only way to manage that is if you have a smart system that has all the components connected and talking to each other, regardless how small or big they are.
Yeah. Let's get back to your product, and your products too, I should say, because it's not currently available. Is that right? This is something that is in the dream machine now, in the process, in the dream factory being made. But RedEarth has been around for as long as I can remember, and there's other things about. So what can customers who are looking to get a battery at the moment get from RedEarth, and what's the sort of recommendation for people? I mean, I've mentioned this to you before. I have a shamefully small rooftop solar system. I mean, it sort of does what I need because I work from home, which is very fortunate. But so I'm probably not the greatest candidate. But if you have, say, your average size system, which these days is heading towards, between 8 and 10 kilowatts, what kind of battery do you get? Do you need a different inverter? Can your systems be paired with existing inverters, etc.?
Not shamefully small what you've got.
I feel like it could have been bigger, to be honest. It's east-west, so it's good. But I do have a big tree. But it doesn't really shade the roof so much. It's more that we did a little renovation that's made a funny split level that made the roof a bit complicated.
And that's always a big issue. I agree.
Yeah.
You know, our systems are actually they would probably work with what you've got, but I do think you probably need a little more PV on your roof than you
Mm.
currently have. But the systems that we have can be retrofitted. So if you have an existing AC solar system like you might have already, whereas again I'd say you'd want to add more to it, they can be retrofitted and AC connected. We normally suggest as much as possible to run the DC through our system as well. It just gives us a much better level of control. With the way we do that is we can manage even your existing solar systems. In most cases, there's very few exceptions, through frequency shifting in an off-grid mode. What I mean by that is because our systems always provide whole of house backup options,
Yep.
if you do go into a situation that the grid goes away and your house goes off grid and goes into backup
Mm.
mode, at that point, we manage your existing AC solar by frequency shifting. This takes into account our current 4777 standard, which allows us to increase the frequency up to 52 hertz. And if the inverter abides by that, it will gradually decrease its generation up to 52 hertz. And at that point in time, it'll stop generating. If it
Right.
doesn't abide by that, it'll abide by the old 4777 standard, which basically means we'll frequency shift to 52 and turn the other inverter off if necessary. So
Right.
if we have too much generation and not enough storage capacity in the battery, it'll manage it that way. So retrofit works, and it works really well with pretty much
Okay.
all vendors that are out there. Normally, though, we would say try to get as much DC solar directly into our system because it's a hybrid system as possible.
Yep. So if you've got an 8 kilowatt system, what sort of size battery are you looking at?
Depends on your usage, really. If you've
I
got
suppose, yeah.
if you've got an 8
That's a silly
kilowatt system,
question.
I think the minimum I would go for would be 20 kilowatt hours. But to be honest, right now with the battery rebate, I'd go for 45.
Wow. Jesus.
Well, but think about it. Your cost per kilowatt hour, again, remember, right? Ours are fully upgradable, easily upgradable. So it's not like you're buying more boxes and more cables. So what you do is you get yourself your main system and you just fill it up. Because
Yeah.
adding additional batteries, your delta, you're going to be looking at maybe, I don't know, $100 per kilowatt hour. And
Yeah.
that's ridiculously low. It's actually less, I would suspect. It depends on what the installer takes, but I'd say you'd be between $60 and $100 per kilowatt hour for every additional battery. Why not?
I suppose. Yeah. I mean, and look, I have heard that message that now is the time to go and go big.
Absolutely.
Because it's not going to, come around again. Well, I mean, we don't know that, but yes, this is the rebate. This is it. And what I mean by it's not going to come around again is you're not going to want to do it again. It's going to be, in the same way that you buy a fridge or a car, you're not going to want to, turn around in 5 years and reassess and do it all over again. So if you're going to electrify, if you're going to get an electric vehicle, yes, go big.
And fortunately, I think in this context as well, the rebate is structured in such a way that you can only do it once for an ME. So for your household, I would not scrimp. And again, you look at your numbers, right? Adding, if let's say you wanted to do 15 kilowatt hours and going to 45, that's 30 times, that's $3,000 in the worst case.
Yep.
Given that you're probably spending between, 4 or 5 times that already, maybe that's a good investment now.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's interesting how we place a lot of importance on return on investment for electricity purchases. And I know that is important, and it's certainly important in context of a time where people are doing it tough. But when you look at the other things, the other big ticket purchases you make in your life, I mean, to expect a return on investment for a car is laughable. Or for any car that I've driven, that it is. All of mine have been secondhand, so even then. But yeah, I think this is an important investment because solar panels last such a long time. Batteries, what we're looking at 10, 15 years for. Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see that extend as well as technology improves, and also as we see things play out. I think in the early days of solar, no one really had any idea how long they would last, and we've found that I think there's some that are over 30 years old now that are still powering away. So yes, not to say that this will happen with batteries, but yes, I think it's a really important investment and a really good time to do it. And with yours, sorry, go. You were going to say something.
In the context of what we just said, how hard is it to make an ROI on this one? Remember what I said earlier when we talked about the fact that you need oversized systems to participate in the market?
Yep.
That's it. So now instead of doing your 10 or 15 or 20 kilowatt hours, which is sufficient to manage your self-consumption, you have 40 or 45. Now you've got 20 or 25 kilowatt hours that allow you to play in the grid and still satisfy your own needs. So you no longer need to think about the fact that, do I want to do this? Because is it going to leave me short tomorrow morning? Now you just go like, whatever happens to the grid, I'm all in. And so you turn it from being a pure cost into being a revenue generator for yourself. And you manage, so basically your technical hedge that I mentioned before now becomes actually real.
Yeah, and you've also got that that backup power, which is not to be sneezed at either in this.
And you're setting yourself up for future use when you do peer-to-peer trading. You're there.
Yes. The future, which is just around the corner. When can we expect to see the MIB appear in Australia?
It'll be mid next year is my expectation. There's a fair bit of stuff that needs to happen between now and then. It's not quite in the Dream Factory. It's a little bit beyond that already.
Beyond the Dream Factory.
We have initial prototypes in place. We'll finish prototypes this calendar year, and then early next year it'll go into the field. No, there's not an open beta on this one. It'll go to a set number of people where we do some relatively early alpha testing. It'll go into certification probably in the April timeframe or so, and certification is quite involved in this case because we really need to certify to a large number of standards and at least 3 different grid codes or grid standards as well. So we expect that to take place between April and August thereabout. So my expectation is it'll be in market around about between August and October. And October is all energy, as we all know. So
yes, that will be exciting. Let's just, we've gone really over time, but not that there is a time, and I knew that we would. So you have a lot of interesting things to talk about. But let's quickly talk about EV charging and bidirectional charging, because that's really interesting. It's still sort of, that seems to me to be something that's still not quite a reality here in Australia. But when we last spoke, you were saying that we're actually ahead of the rest of the world on this.
By far. It's a really interesting situation. The EVs, we've always been at the back of the pack here in Australia. No emission standards for cars have basically left us as the dumping ground for the high emissions vehicles, and EVs were never something that were pushed by the manufacturers because of that. Given some changes, tariffs, for example, we've now become quite an interesting market. Cost of gas has helped as well. Yes, we will not say anything bad about that. But the other thing that's happened is there was some really good work done on 4777 by a small number of people who have had some very good foresight a few years ago, which basically means that we are now one of the only countries in the world that has a grid connection standard that explicitly and very clearly nominates vehicle-to-grid chargers in a way that actually makes a lot of sense and is quite straightforward. And we pair that with the sophistication of our market and the fact that we have wholesale market exposed tariffs available, that we have ways of making money in the market for a residential customer. And all of a sudden, we've moved from being the back of the pack to being right at the front of the pack when it comes to bidirectional charging. And everyone's woken up to this. So the car OEMs have woken up to this big time. The manufacturers for kit like what we do have woken up to this big time. And now everybody's looking at Australia and going, right, what can we do here? And how can we show how this works here so that in Europe and in the US, it'll work as well?
Well, that's really exciting. And it's a really positive note to end this discussion on. Thank you so much for joining us, Marc. I think I'd like to keep getting you back maybe on a 3-monthly basis so we can discuss where everything's going. But definitely we will check in with you next year when this MIB lands, and I'm expecting to see some Men in Black paraphernalia at the launch at All Energy, just so you know.
I don't necessarily know what the licensing says to that, so we might not be able to do that.
Men in Beige?
Doesn't have the same ring.
No, it doesn't. All right. Well, thank you so much, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks a lot, Sophie.